Hi everybody, I'm Helen Lockett and I am a research manager at Discovery. I led the research that we'll be talking to you about today, and I'll be taking you through some of the key insights we had from it.
And I'm Ryan Lewis in the BBC Audiences team, and I commissioned this piece of research. So it won't have missed anyone's attention that what we call on BAB unmatched TV activity, which is non-traditional TV viewing of video games and the like, it's been growing at a rate in recent years, and that's something that's really been challenging iPlayer amongst under-16s, as well as challenging TV viewing that's more traditional format. So that's partly why we commissioned this research, really, not just with competitors like Netflix and Amazon Prime in mind and how they're growing into the kids streaming market, but also to look at YouTube too, which has been eating into media viewing time massively with user-generated content, some TV clips, and now really slick productions of its own too. So the BBC had two questions really that they wanted to answer with this piece of research. And they were, what were the reasons for this shift really within the children's online video landscape? What was it that was changing children's media habits and driving that change? And then also, what were the opportunities there for us to adjust our offer really off the back of that, and how we could remain as relevant as possible and continue our position as a leading provider of media for children?
So at Discovery, we tackled this research problem in several different ways to unlock the most valuable insights to help the BBC with these questions. So we used a video diary, an online community, passive tracking and in-home interviews to look at the reasons why kids are using different services from all different angles. So with our insights, we built and validated these through a cumulative process. So the passive tracking video diary and guided pre-task took place over the same 2 weeks before we went and did in-home interviews with a select group of the participants. The passive tracking was to give us robust data on what they were viewing, when they were viewing it, what services they were viewing, and the video diary helped to flesh that out and give us a view into their media lives, and also to give us a little bit of information about what they were watching on the TV, because passive tracking isn't available yet on televisions. Then the guided pre-task, it was a chance for us to meet them virtually and gain an initial understanding of the media use that they had, their feelings behind it and their preferences. And it was also a chance to kind of open a dialogue with them and get to know them a little bit better before we went to do the in-home interviews, where we were able to explore some of these topics that have been raised in more depth and go through some different activities with them. So it was important to us to speak to a range of kids across the UK because we wanted to make sure that we were representing fairly the views of people not just in the London bubble. So we spoke to people in London, but we also spoke to people in Edinburgh, Cardiff, Bristol, Manchester and Birmingham. And we also wanted to make sure that there was a good mix of demographics in there, so we had an even mix of males and females. We split the participants into 3 age groups, so 0 to 5s, 6 to 9s, and 10 to 15-year-olds. And we also had an even mix of social grades B to E, so avoiding kind of the extremes on either end and getting a nice representative sample of people across the UK. We used a range of exercises to unlock insights remotely and in person. So remotely, before we went to those in-home interviews, we used the video diaries to show us what they were watching, as I mentioned before. And the passive tracking was to see what they're really watching. So sometimes people might not want to tell you exactly what they're watching. Maybe they're a little bit embarrassed if it's something they feel is for a kid that's a little bit younger than them, for example. So it gave us a chance to see the whole breadth of activities, and also so that if they had forgotten anything, it wouldn't be missed in our research. And we also used a deprivation task in the community beforehand. So this was to look at how crucial services are and what's the second choice if they're not allowed to use a service. So we said to them, you're not allowed to use your favourite service for 2 days. What do you use instead? Are you actually able to go that long without using your service? Why are you deciding to use a different platform? And it gave us a really interesting insight into those kind of decision-making factors when they're choosing different services and content. When we went to see them in person, we had a task where they navigated different SVOD services during the interview. So this could be Netflix, for example, or iPlayer. And we'd asked them to find a new program, some new content that they hadn't seen before. And again, it gave us a chance to see how they were using these platforms, but also what they're looking for from content and how they're making that decision. And then finally, we used emojis to unlock feelings about different services. So often with young kids, it can be a little bit hard to articulate exactly what they're thinking and feeling about things. And the emojis give us a nice shortcut and a way for them to express their preferences and give you a bit more insight than just, I like this or I don't like this. So before we go into the insights from this research, just one last bit about the methodology. This research was conducted in 2019, in other words, prior to the coronavirus lockdown. So we have seen an increase in media consumption, according to Ofcom, across all ages in April 2020 compared to previous years, an increase of 20%. And that's across both broadcast TV and unmatched viewing. However, in our research, we weren't looking at just how long they're spending on different services. We were looking at why they're doing this, what is driving them to use different services or watch different content. And therefore, our research is still really relevant at this time because it's based on those needs rather than just viewing figures.
So now you know you can trust what we say, it's time to show you what we found. And what we're going to start with is by looking at some of the things that you might be assuming you know already about the landscape of online video when it comes to how children are consuming it. We're going to put up a couple of choices on the screen and give you a little moment to think about what you think the answer to the question that I'm going to give you is. So first, to start with, which do you think children watch more of? Video on demand or live TV?
So it's an easy one to start with. They're watching more video on demand. So live TV is more common amongst the younger kids compared to older kids, so particularly the under fives. So it might be used as kind of background noise or something in the background for parents when they want to get a task done in the household or to keep their children occupied. And they often choose channels that they feel safe leaving their children with, so something like CBeebies, where they know that they can put it on and whatever comes on will be age appropriate and their child will probably enjoy. But when kids start getting older and they start having favourite shows, there's definitely a move towards streaming video on demand, and even in that kind of under 5 age range, they are still using it. And by the time they're about 10 to 15, the majority of their screen time is streaming video on demand, unless it's a TV event, so something like Love Island or Strictly, where watching it live becomes really important, or if it's part of family time.
So now looking at devices a little bit more. So on which are we seeing children stream more video? Is it on tablets or on TV sets?
And the answer to this one is TV sets. So although there was a bit of a tablet boom a few years ago and people were expecting usage to really continue increasing, what we found is that TV sets are like another screen for kids now, that with the advent of smart TVs and being able to switch between the different apps and different services, it's just a bigger screen for them to be able to watch things on, and therefore it becomes more of a preference. Tablets are still used though. They tend to be used for when people are on the go. So for example, if you're on a car journey, if you're waiting somewhere, then you can download a show and your kids are able to watch it afterwards. And they are also used for dual screening sometimes, but it is that TV set usage that tends to be more prevalent than tablets.
So for the third question, we're looking at two of the big names in provision of online video, and which are children watching more of? Is it Netflix or YouTube?
And it's back to another easy one. They're watching more YouTube. So in our passive tracking, we were able to see how long they spent on the different platforms. So if you added up all the time that each child spent on each platform over the course of the 2 weeks we were tracking them, on Netflix they spent 2.5 days, and on YouTube they spent almost 13 days worth of watching content. And if you're looking at this as an average of a child who uses the service per day, for Netflix that's an average of about 42 minutes per day, but for YouTube it's an average of about an hour and 10 minutes per day. And we found that this was because kids are wanting shorter content. So with YouTube they can have lots of different content and quite short videos compared to a longer episode or film that they might be watching on Netflix. And we found this as well in terms of the types of TV shows that they were watching on YouTube. They didn't tend to watch a whole episode of it, but they would watch clips of the shows that they liked.
So sticking with YouTube, who was it that watched more YouTube? Which of the two age ranges? Was it the 6 to 9 year olds or 10 to 15 year olds?
And it's the 6 to 9 year olds. So again, looking at adding up all the time everybody spent watching it over the 2 weeks, there was 192 hours spent by the 6 to 9s on YouTube versus 67 hours spent by the 10 to 15s. Looking at the amount of time, the longest amount of time spent on YouTube in one day, for the 6 to 9s, one child spent almost 11 hours watching YouTube in a single day, whereas in the 10 to 15s, it is 5 hours, 11 minutes as the longest period. And it's worth saying that with that 11 hours, it was on a weekend, but it still shows you just how much content they're watching. But what's really interesting as well is that they tend to be switching between different creators. So the 11 hours spent, it wasn't on a single creator. In fact, the most time that they spent on a single creator was only half an hour. And what we find is that as kids get older, so they reach their teens, this 10 to 15 age range, the social cachet becomes more important. So they are spending more time on platforms like Netflix, where they can watch the latest show that they can talk about with their friends, and that means that there's a bit less time left to be able to spend on YouTube.
Okay, and now the last question, and it's one that's looking at a really important moment in the lives of children and how they're consuming media. At what age do children start to gain control over most of what they're watching? Is it at the age 3 and under, or is it when they're over 3?
And the answer is 3 and under. So it's worth noting that this isn't complete control, but they do have a lot more control than we've seen in previous years. So they get to choose the majority of what they watch, although this will be sometimes within a kind of walled garden idea of the content that the parent finds safe. And we can see this evidenced in the quotes we have here. So the parent of this 2-year-old says he asks for his favourite shows about 90% of the time, and the rest of the time we will pop something in for him. And with the over 3s, I let them go in kids, and they choose what they want to watch within reason. And we feel like the limiting factor for the 3s and unders, it is a little bit of that parental control, but it's also more that they're limited by motor skills or language skills, so being able to use the remote, for example. And if they're at an age where they aren't able to do that, then often they'll direct their parent to select the show that they want to watch, so there is still a lot of control there held by the child. So we're now going to take you on to the 6 key insights we think that you need to know about kids' online media habits. And the first one is the tension between usability and content. So we are really interested in this shift of service use that we saw and we've just been talking about across the age groups. And what we found in the online community and the in-home interviews is that for younger kids, usability is really important. So for these under 5s, as we just mentioned, they may not have the motor controls or the language skills to be able to navigate around a service very easily if it's one of the slightly more difficult ones to use. So having a service that is really intuitive for them, that they find very easy to navigate about, will be really important, because otherwise they won't be able to find the content. But as kids get older, so kind of this 6 and over age range, content becomes even more important because they're able to navigate around services, even if it's a little bit more difficult. And what they're really looking for is that key content, the things that are going to keep them really interested and engaged, and this only increases with age, and it becomes more and more important as they get older. And what this means for streaming platforms is that the challenges differ by age. So for iPlayer, they had fantastic content for the youngest kids, but the barrier was usability. They found iPlayer a little bit harder to use. And for the older kids, they were able to use iPlayer, but they found it harder to find content that they wanted to watch, and that could also be tied in a little bit to the usability and the content that was available.
And identifying this tension, really, it was a cornerstone to build on everything that we did off the back of this research. And we looked at how it manifested itself across the different ages of children that were using iPlayer. And it lets us key in, really, on focus our activity in the right places to improve things for the better for all of the children. So at the youngest end, we had iPlayer Kids app already, which is, an award-winning app. It was really well received by the audience. But the iPlayer Kids app wasn't the only way in which young children were accessing iPlayer on their own. And even the devices that iPlayer Kids is available on, they weren't always the most popular way to get hold of their favourite content. So from that, there was an acknowledgement that we needed to improve the user experience in a bigger, bolder, broader way across the whole of iPlayer, if not the whole of the BBC's online offer. And then for older children, we've taken a good look at what content they were watching with us and what content they were watching elsewhere. And we've looked at their expectations and how they've changed around the ease of navigation, how they use platforms, how recommendations are delivered to them. And those expectations have certainly been heightened by how they're using other platforms in a way that we've had to respond to, really. And so much time can be shown to be spent with those other leading platforms that they've set the norms for us in many ways for us to build on. So we built on both the platform usability to better suit those needs and expectations that have been set, and also we built on our content offer to make sure that we've improved both at that older end.
So our second insight is about how kids are navigating, and it's that younger kids navigate through characters on the homepage. So with these under fives, these very youngest kids, they're identifying shows by characters, not titles or screenshots. So having large pictures of colourful characters is really crucial for navigating streaming services. As we said, they might not be relying on language, they're going to be relying on the character and the character's appearance to be able to pick the shows that they want to watch. And you can see this in how they're using the platforms where they're unlikely to use the search bar. They're very unlikely to be typing in the name of a show. Instead, they're scrolling down the homepage and they're expecting to be able to find and for it to be populated with the shows that they like. Also, in terms of the appearance, they really like bright backgrounds instead of Netflix's black. So we found that older kids and parents think of it as more of like a cinematic black when it comes to Netflix. But that association isn't there for young kids, and something like a bright background, like a white background for example, means that the characters can really stand out and it grabs their attention. And in terms of the content that they're looking at, they really like fun cartoons, but the parents want the content to have some kind of aspect of learning to it, some kind of education, so that they don't feel bad about the amount of time that their kid is spending watching content. So in terms of content that's going to be really engaging, easy for them to find, and good for both the parents and the children, include these colourful main characters to make it easier for the kids to find on the SVOD service.
So on the back of this, we've really changed how iPlayer has started presenting programmes to children. And we've done all we can really, and keep trying to improve it, to make it more accessible for children who aren't quite as comfortable yet with written language, but also in looking at how character design within our titles can be tweaked and changed so that they're standing out a bit more. And we've looked at the programmes that make up our entire portfolio within children's, and we've made sure that those shows that are anchored by clear leads or groups of characters, they're more identifiable and they're more clearly presented for children to recognise. And combining the recognition and those characters that are easier to recognise with more opportunities to see them in a more visual approach, then off the back of that, it's increased familiarity of the characters and the programmes in there, and it's combined with the more image-led navigation to make iPlayer more child-friendly than I think it's ever been.
So our next insight is looking at the type of content that kids want, and kids want content that reflects who they are. So one of the things that was really important across all the ages is humour. So they really want something that's going to make them laugh. Again, it will help keep them engaged, and it's particularly key as kids get older. So these kids age 6 and up, it's really key to keep them interested in your content. The other thing that kids are looking for is representation in their content, and this we mean in two ways. So the first is seeing people that look like themselves, and the second is seeing their interests represented. And this is one of the areas that YouTube really excels at. It's particularly good at this. And it's because it has a wide variety of creators uploading videos onto the platform, which means that kids are almost always able to find somebody who looks like them or who's talking about their interest. The flip side to this is that the time is split over many creators. So remember that child we talked about before who spent a long time on YouTube, but only 30 minutes on one creator at a time at most, on his favourites. And he was switching between different gaming YouTubers. So the common thread there is his interest of gaming rather than loyalty to just one or two creators. The other thing that we think is worth noting is that kids aren't always watching content that's targeted at their age range. They are watching content that's targeted at an older age. So by this we don't mean something completely inappropriate. They're not watching content for, say, 30-year-olds. But they are looking for something that is maybe a couple of years older than themselves. And it helps with this feeling of being a bit more grown up, even though they're still young. So something that gives them that feeling of being a little bit more grown up, that they're watching something a little bit kind of more adult to them, but still being really age appropriate will win with these age ranges. So in terms of what kids are watching, we can see this playing out through the shows that we found in our passive tracking, in our interviews, in the video diaries, and in that community. So with the 0 to 5s, you can see the colourful cartoons coming out like Hey Dougie, Bing, Paw Patrol, Alpha Blocks, and you can also see this slightly older content that we're talking about in the form of The Worst Witch, where it is no longer animated content, but it's still age appropriate for them. And we've also put Ryan's Toys reviews here because we think it's really worth mentioning, because although they do split their time over different creators, Ryan Toys Review, as I'm sure many of you will have heard of, is just a complete juggernaut when it comes to this age range. So in terms of the amount of time spent watching Ryan Toy's review across the sample, it was over 9 hours, and that was just head and shoulders above any other creator. Moving to the 6 to 9s, we can see here that there is a little bit of a younger influence in terms of the Paw Patrol. This could be kind of comfort watching, or if they have a younger sibling. We have the Worst Witch appearing here, which is the age where you might expect to see it more. Things like Sam and Cat, again, that kind of youthful live action show. But then we also have the slightly more adult content here, and by this we mean family viewing like Our Planet, but then also something that is maybe a bit less appropriate for that age range, like Eating with My Ex. And then moving into the 10 to 15s, you can see something like Brooklyn Nine-Nine, bringing that humour element, is in there and is very popular. You have the more teenage shows like Pretty Little Liars or Riverdale. There is a little bit of younger in there, like The Dumping Ground. Again, similar things, maybe younger siblings, or it's a little bit of a comfort thing, and a familiar show. But then you also have some which are quite a bit older and possibly pushing that boundary if appropriate, like Love Island or EastEnders.
So it's definitely no real secret to us that children weren't only watching content that was made specifically for them, but perhaps quite how popular some titles that were coming through and the nature of those titles, like Love Island and Walking Dead, they opened our eyes a little bit more to what they were consuming. And there was a real appreciation that we need to show a broader range of content and make sure that we're really hitting home with the breadth available on the BBC, and our teams have begun to respond to that in the range of content that's available on iPlayer. Fortunately, the research told us that a lot of what we do, it sits favourably against what people want from BBC Children's, and that's great, and it's always nice to hear we're doing something right. We didn't need to stop presenting children on screen. They liked seeing themselves, they liked hearing the wide range of stories that reflected childhood across the UK, and that was great for us to continue with. However, we have taken a good look at what content we have available and started bringing back more of their old favourites for some nostalgia viewing, carved out a slither of our budget to start making shows aimed at a young teen audience, from those headed up by Stacey Dooley to longer and shorter length dramas. And these are helping us relearn about the consumption of this audience a little on our platform, and it's starting to help inform our future commissioning and content portfolio too. So we're thinking about how we can experiment a bit more with fewer limits around content length, with that freedom given to us by online video, and how we can be a little bit more fun too, and how we can prioritise more can't miss content that viewers are really seeking out, given that, they search and find things online.
So our next insight is that it's about keeping content together, not separate. And by this we don't mean mix all of the ages together and then don't think about it any further. What we mean is that kids are used to personalisation and they're not expecting to go to different pages on a platform. So it's this idea of being on the homepage and it populates it with content that's tailored to you. And reflecting this range of content that they're watching, both a little bit older and a little bit younger, the kind of sibling effect that we talked about, being able to have that in one place is really important. And the other thing that we found really interesting is that there's a breakdown of scheduling. So kids are expecting to watch what they want, when they want. It's no longer about I watch this in the morning and this in the evening. It's more about I want to fulfill this need and therefore I will watch this content. So for example, this could be mood management or killing time. Mood management might be watching something relaxing before bed. Killing time might be this idea, like we mentioned before, if you're traveling or you're waiting for something and therefore you want to watch some content to fill the time until you're doing something else.
And iPlayer's children's environment now, it's really started to bring in a broader range of pre-Watershed and family-friendly content, stuff that we know is already being watched on BBC One or BBC Two, especially around Christmas and Easter times when we can really bolster the amount of content that's available to them. And by refreshing sort of how iPlayer's looking and what we're bringing in, they're easily able to navigate now between CBBC, CBeebies, BBC One, and quickly, clearly choose between content that suits whatever need they've got at the time. So whether it's The Dumping Ground, Hey Dougie, Greatest Dancer, Blue Planet, the whole range really of content that iPlayer's got is more available to them, and it gives them a better first impression when they arrive of what iPlayer can do for them. And you can see here a number of the changes we've made already. iPlayer on children's accounts now, it's much more white, it's much more colourful and bright. It's got far more characters and a far wider selection of family viewing that's scattered amongst all the children's titles that are their favourite.
So our next insight is that families will share logins unless prompted otherwise. So we've talked a lot about personalisation, but in order for it to be effective, you need to read a single person, not a family. And what we found in our in-home task, where we were asking them to go onto different services, find new content, is that families are very unlikely to switch profiles or logins between different members of the family unless they're prompted. They just don't think about it. It isn't something that comes to mind when they first open it up. What this means is that different services, they need to be prompting people to switch logins or to check that it is the same person. And this needs to be as hassle-free as possible as well. It shouldn't be something that adds a big barrier. It should be a moment's work. So something like profiles within a single login would be really good at achieving this personalisation without adding a lot of hassle. And if this doesn't happen, it can be a real problem because you end up having adult content getting mixed in with the kids' content. So it's no longer a kind of safeguarding for children to go and choose content from on their own, and also when the adults are using it, they're having children's content popping up, so it isn't really effective for any of the members of the family.
And it's fair to say really that when we launched the account process at first, what we delivered for children, it just wasn't really friendly enough for them at launch, and it wasn't friendly really for their parents either to sign them up to it and then in turn to get everyone to continue to use it. There were barriers there that on paper they seemed fairly logical and quite practical and there for the right reasons with responsibilities to the audience in mind, but they turned into quite a confusing, frustrating process when we rolled it out at scale. So this research, it really helped us highlight just how big a gulf there was between the ease of use on iPlayer and the perceived experience on other platforms when we compared it back to our own. So our wonderful UX&D and profile teams, they went away and they've worked with the children's department to create a method of both making a new account and also switching accounts, which has brought down the barriers to entry massively and the barrier to continued use are far lower too. And now we've got children's profiles up and live on TV, which you might have seen if you've used iPlayer on a smart TV, and we continue to invest more time and effort into the offer that we've got here.
So our last insight is about this walled garden we've been talking about, and that's that a walled garden which grows with the kids will win. So our deprivation task in the research showed just how crucial the idea of a walled garden is for these youngest kids. When we asked people to stop their kids from watching a platform for 2 days, in some cases the parent said, I already tried to do this. They said, I don't trust YouTube to effectively filter content, even on the YouTube Kids app, that's appropriate for my kids. And therefore, I try and ban them from it for a couple of days or completely, but it may not quite work. But it does show that in terms of the parental control element, if that walled garden isn't there for the young kids, they will try and stop their kids from using that service. And as kids get older, they are looking for this more adult content without being completely age inappropriate, showing that it needs to adapt to the age of the kid and how the kid is growing. So what we found is that Kids iPlayer and Sky Kids do this younger walled garden very well, while Netflix gets the content mix right as kids get older. But even with Netflix, you do need to toggle this walled garden for young kids on and off, and it adds that kind of extra step in there, that extra barrier to it being a really smooth process that people no longer have to think about in great depth. And therefore we think that what's missing from the market at the moment and what would be the ideal for kids is a walled garden that grows as the kids age, rather than needing to continually change settings or switch between kind of different logins or profiles for a service.
And this ideal, just like any ideal really, it's a difficult thing to achieve, and it's one that we're certainly aiming for, and it's going to take some time to get it right. That's if we ever can get it right. As part of our aim, we want to stay child friendly at all times, and that responsibility remains with us, and it weighs on us to ensure that the risk of children stumbling across content they shouldn't is always minimised. I think with the BBC, we're quite fortunate in that a lot of the content we do, the vast volume of it, it's not unsuitable post-watershed content. So a lot of what they can find is still good for them, but it was still quite a big step for us to bring down the walled gardens that we had in place to start being a bit more dynamic and bringing in some more BBC 1 and 2 content and being a bit more personalised and more recommendations. It's another step down the road for us that we're getting down. And we're certainly not wanting to stop curating and making sure that we're selecting the best of the content for the audience and presenting it to them. That's going to stay at the heart of what we do for some time longer. But as we mentioned before, we're wanting to make our personalisation smarter and tailor things a bit more for each user. And, starting with maybe more nuanced age groups, and then in an ideal world, maybe being able to adapt to individual tastes and needs. And it's a real challenge, like Helen said, to do that with children. And you've got to take into account that 1 week their desire to hear about the latest fad is huge, and then a few months later maybe they don't want to hear about it at all. And to take all of that into account with all the cognitive, social, physical development that happens from age to age and stage to stage, it doesn't make this easy. And this is definitely a difficult one that we're going to strive to, and it might take us some time.
So that's the end of our presentation and all the insights that we shared with you today. I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please do feel free to get in touch with me at helen@discoveryres.co.uk, and I'd be very happy to have a chat about any questions that you have. And thanks again for listening.